Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Dailies on Network Television, where we have quite a number of stories on the front page of the paper, where we're saying that President Ahmed Bola Tinubu have created a new ministry, talking about the livestock ministry, even though we do not have a minister for that ministry yet, but that is what it is. As well as we're saying that the House of Reps have actually told the president or the federal government to hold on the Samoa agreement because of the LGBTQ clause that a number of people are not really clear about, even though we're saying that the Nigerian Bar Association is saying that there is nothing of such that will affect Nigeria. But because of how the whole thing is not really clear to Nigerians, so the House of Reps have told the federal government to hold on that agreement for the meantime. We have other stories that are quite appealing on the papers. We would love you to actually air your views and your opinion on that on our Facebook as well as on YouTube. I am Stella Lashidasham. I will be doing the program with Rachel Tansy. Good morning.
Morning, sir.
Good morning. Well, we shall, go straight into the paper, and Rachel will take us through the first paper for today.
The first paper for today is Nigerian Tribune. The big story: Tinubu kicks off reform development of lifestyle sector, creates ministry. To name minister soon, Jega replaces Ganduje as Reform Implementation Committee chairman. You can find details on page 3. Pengassan Nupeng write Tinubu to investigate Dangote's allegation against IOCs. Details can be found on page 3. Government to halt Samoa agreement implementation. No gay right requirement in Samoa deal coming from the NBA. Details can be found on page 4. Only 3 of 22 airports viable, others subsidized. You can find details on page 5. A report from FAN. NDLEA arrests wanted drug baron in village mansion, recovers meth, precursors and guns. Reps back bill seeking to reserve special slots for women in National Assembly and state assemblies. Police to charge man who climbed 125th mast with attempted suicide incitement. Details can be found on page 26. Orosanye report followed due process, senators tell the federal government. Oppose scrapping of video censors board, wants law establishing merged MDAs reviewed. More details can be found on page 3. SSANU NASU members stage nationwide protest over withheld salaries. Protest rocks on though as farmers kick against alleged sale of farmlands. Details can be found on page 4, and that's all the news on Nigerian Tribune.
Right, let's take a look at the Vanguard newspaper. Scarcity, fuel shortage, queues worsen in Lagos, Abuja, and others. More detail found on page 20. NNPC seek $2 billion oil-backed facility to finance operations. Tinubu create Ministry of Livestock Development. Ministry can end herders, farmers clashes, and banditry. Coming from Arewa Economic Forum. More detail found on page 4. Withheld salaries, SANU, NASU, crippled nation varsities. Detail found on page 4. And the big news on the paper is saying 400 billion naira oil production shortfall threatens 2024 budget. With the writer here saying federal government tackling the issues coming from the presidency. 2 million barrel per day production achievable coming from Kiari, and we are having the IOC saying Nigeria needs to attract contractors back. More detailed in the paper. Suspend Samoa agreement implementation, reps tell the federal government. No clause for federal government to recognize LGBTQ rights coming from the Nigerian Bar Association. And we have MPAN calls for release of abducted journalists. Detail of that found on page 26. And the issue of hunger in the land, Nigerians losing patience, Senate tells Tinubu. More detail on page 4. We have a column for Efe Babalola, and then on sport where we see Super Eagles, the Nigerian Football Federation wants Besiro back. More detail of that can be found in the paper, and that's all on Vanguard newspaper.
On Leadership newspaper, audited accounts show no 423 billion naira fraud coming from it concerning the El Rufai probe. Northwest Commission bill ready for Tinubu's assent, a statement from the Senate. Trending NSCDC official remanded in Kuje prison over job scam on numbers. Ex-Minister Umar Farouk to account for 729 billion naira. Details of trends and numbers can be found on page 2. Exchange rate crippled vehicle importation as volume drops by 60%. Concerning withheld salaries, varsities workers protest says we are hungry. The big story on the paper, Tinubu creates livestock ministry despite Orasanye's report. The writer says heads presidential committee on livestock reforms alongside Atairu Jega. Experts worried over funding for additional ministry. Nigeria targets less meat imports. More details can be found on page 4. And Sele, we are seeing a new ministry in a time where we're talking about cutting down the cost of governance. Why are we not having this a department if it is that important under an already existing ministry, Celia? Why must it be a new ministry? Meaning now it has to be established like every other ministry to be able to meet up certain standards. Now we have to look at a ministerial appointment for that position. Every other thing that will govern another kind of cost in the country. We look at how personnel cost is one of the major things that consumes our budget. And here we are having a ministry of livestock. And I don't know how it's intended to be able to bring an end to the farmers' headers clash, because we saw that in the previous paper where that it has the possibility of ending farmers' headers clash. And then I asked, we have the Ministry of Agriculture, and we know agriculture encompasses virtually everything: horticulture, forestry, livestock farming, everything that is about agriculture is under that. Why, if there is a need to bring out maybe a department as such that will be able to target this issue, I believe should fall under a ministry that already exists, even if it means for our security agents, because we know that the situation between herders and farmers is a violent one. We can have departments even in our security agencies that are championing the cause of seeing an end to what we have the NSCDC, which are in the position to tackle civilian issues. Our farmers are civilians, and also these herders, but for some reason the herders are attacking farmers. We should just be able to bring out departments under what is already existing than having a ministry. This started since last year, where we saw a motion being moved by that in the Senate. We talked about it and we said, no, there is no need for a livestock ministry. They came in with the thought of nomadic farming ministry, and we know that nomadic farming is the herdsmen moving from one place to another, and livestock. We saw that being moved, and then there was a lot of talks left, right, center concerning if we are going to have a livestock ministry, then farmers also should have their own ministry. How can a one-sided ministry be able to solve a two-sided problem? And I don't understand how it's going to be achieved, but we can leave that other side and focus on the expenses. When we are thinking about merging MDAs to cut down the cost of governance, we are seeing that happening. And now we are seeing that we are going to create more ministries again. And who knows what other ministry tomorrow this administration will come up with, rather than just placing it under the ministry that is supposed to be, that is already existing at the moment.
No, Rachel, there's no better time to love to be a Nigerian than now. When I saw the news yesterday, and of course, I love seeing the reaction of people. I love hearing what people's opinion is about, all of these things. And, one of the comments that cracked me was one that said that, okay, right now the Ministry of Agriculture is now left for native doctors. I know Nigerians just have a way of,
making jokes out of
cracking
everything.
jokes out of very serious matter. But that is on a lighter note, Rachel. I wonder if really the federal government creating a livestock ministry, if they are really saying it's just so that they can solve the issue of farmers' headers clash. Rachel, imagine poultry farmers coming to say we also need a ministry. Imagine those into fisheries saying we also need a ministry. Why do we now have the Ministry of Agriculture? Just like you said, The Ministry of Agriculture is an umbrella that houses everything that has to do with agriculture as a whole. So really, a number of people are coming out to say that, I mean, there are a number of things that Nigerians have been crying about: hunger and many other things, bad governance. In fact, I'm seeing a circular going around that from 1st to 10th of August, there's going to be protests concerning bad governance. And I just couldn't help but cast my mind back to the hashtag answers, the number of lives that have to die because of the issues that are happening. So I do not know what the government is thinking, because just like you rightly take us back during the Romani ministry, and that started during the Buhari's regime.
Yeah.
Number of people kick against it. We saw Gumi also saying that the issue of all of this thing is to give them, and it's more like trying to give the terrorists what they want.
Yeah.
Because if we're going to be honest, the headers that are not violent have never said this is what they want. Because they know that you need to keep your cattle in a way that you don't have to affect other people's farmland. We saw the complaint coming from Kaduna, Benue, Plateau State as well, where we saw headers going into the farms of farmers. And you don't have a land, so what gives you the authority, give you the right to just walk into my farmland and destroy my crops? And so I really do not know what the idea is. But if we're saying that the president has already created the ministry, there's nothing you and I can do about it. Even though I know that, I mean, as a president, you have the right to say, I've actually thought about this and I think this is really not going to be, I'm going to take it back. But it is what it is presently. So we're just waiting to see who will be the minister. Just like you said, we're looking at cutting out the cost of governance, and then we're looking for money to finance another ministry as well. So we'll keep our fingers crossed, Rachel, and see what will be the outcome of all of that.
Still on Leadership newspaper, Osoba presents My Life in the Public Eye, details that you can find on page 12. Reps MBAD found Samoa agreement. NPAN raises concern over safety of abducted reporters. Federal government spent 7.7 trillion naira on debt servicing in 2023. Details can be found on page 25. And then we have picture stories where we can see flood in different states. We can see that in Bayelsa, and that's all the news on Leadership newspaper.
Right, let's take a look at the Punch newspaper. NEF demands grazing reserve as sustainable plans. Livestock Ministry, data found on page 13. On blackout, we see NERC rolls out tough sanction against discourse. 19 Nigerian airport not valuable coming from fan, dated on page 25. And on Samoa agreement, reps demand suspension as NBA fault same-sex allegation. More detail can be found on page 2. And I think that if there is a different opinion coming from reps and NBA, I think we should just take our time to go through it. Of course, we know that Samoa, when you go through the clause, we have to compare what their agreements say with what our constitution say and what we stand for. And we know we already have a constitution that says no to same-sex relationship or marriage, as well as I remember during the Jonathan regime, we also had a review where they say if you are caught in that, about 4 years imprisonment and other things. So I think it is what it is. But then just for Nigerians to be clear about this whole thing, I think it is very wise for the House of Reps to actually say, let's put this thing on a hold for the meantime. Let's review it so that Nigerians can actually be at peace, because it's beginning to, take so much of talks in Nigeria. It just cannot help but ask questions, but it is what it is. So let's just see how this whole agreement will turn out to be.
I know that the federal government will not bring out the agreement, because we could demand and say, okay, we need to see this agreement so that we can read it ourselves. It hasn't gotten to that. The federal government won't bring the contract and bring it in front of you as such. But then if we are having our representatives coming and saying, yes, there's a need to hold it, then perhaps there was actually a red light about it in the first place, and for it to come to the papers as it is, because there are certain things that when you accept, seller, you accept these people's policies. There are policies, there are terms and conditions and all of that. What are the terms and conditions attached to this agreement? What are the things that we must we must there's a word for it
More
where
like
you have
weigh
to
the whole thing.
exactly you just have to compromise. There are certain
Of
things
course.
that when it comes to you, you have to compromise at your country. What are you giving to get this support? Like when we keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing and the borrowing spree and all of that, what are the terms and conditions that the government have been accepting to get certain waivers, to get billions of dollars being waived as loans and all of that? So these are certain questions, and for this one, it's coming to the light, and then it's important for Nigerians to question anything that will question our integrity as a nation and what we stand for. Is important for there to be a halt on it, and then let's look deeply into it before we continue.
Because whether we like it or not, we can keep saying Nigeria is a secular country, but believe you me, Nigeria is a religious country,
We are
so we really
religious.
have to weigh
Yes,
all
sir.
this. Still on the Punch newspaper, fuel crisis lingers as NNPC seek fresh $2 billion crook back loan. With the rider NNPC in talks for another oil-backed loan to boost its finances, says Kyari. Oil firm wants new loan against 30,000, 35,000 barrel per day of crude oil. Here we are seeing the Nigerian drug baron flee South Africa arrested in Imo Mansion. We can see some of the people over there together with the NDLEA that actually intercepted them. Still on the Punch newspaper, court order for feature of Namasa fund diverted under Jonathan government. And we have rescue abducted Kaduna journalists, families, and PAN tells the federal government. How MFLA awarded CBN contract to own company. This is coming from Witness. We're seeing various revelations coming concerning the case of the former CBN governor. More detail found on page 24, and that's all on the Punch newspaper.
On the Daily Times newspaper, headers farmers clash. Tinubu creates Ministry of Livestock Development. NCAA to sanction airlines engaging in deceitful departure time scheduling. House urges federal government to suspend Samoa agreement until clauses clearly defined. Rivers crisis, pro-Wiki Assembly amends education law, returns schools to government control. House urges RMAFC to withhold allocations from Federation account to LGAs. More details can be found on page 2. The big story, ICPC bemoans soaring cases of sexual harassment in primary and secondary schools. Calls for decisive action against offenders. More details can be found on page 2, and I believe that this is a very serious one for the Ministry of Education to step in. What are the types of schools you are approving? You will see certain schools selling, and you will wonder if this kind of school is an existing school. It looks unconducive or inconducive, I may say. It looks like it's not regulated. Pupils are just going to certain school. It's not guided. It's not. We've seen pictures of that on the papers in the past where it came to the attention of the authority that certain schools are not even supposed to exist. I can imagine what happened in such schools and the way students are being vulnerable and cases of sexual abuse arising in primary schools. We are talking about minors on different kinds of levels. It shouldn't even be heard of in the first place. And I believe that this is the time that the ministry should step in. Are schools existing, licensed? Are they following the guidelines? Do you go for your your sanitation at the ministry to make sure that these schools are having there's the conduct that is appropriate in those schools, the relationship between the staff and the student, the teachers and the student? How is it like? Is there a body that watches and controls and governs in regarding the relationship between teachers and students? Because we don't want to be having children that are traumatized by certain things in the school. Many things are going unheard of that shouldn't even happen, and these children have to live with it. Students have to live with it, and we are talking about very young people, most especially that of the primary school, and we can even take it to the secondary school and all of that. I just hope that there is an intervention concerning this, and then something should be done urgently, in my opinion.
Rachel, if we talk about this issue, this is something very, very, very sensitive.
Jeez.
And I'm hoping that the ICPC will actually do something about that. Just like you said, this is a question where you need to ask the Ministry of Education, what are you doing? How many schools? Do you
Yeah.
really have the figure of how many schools are actually operating? Let's go down from the state level. Do you know, as a commissioner of education, can you categorically say this is the number of primary schools we have? For example, in Plateau State, this is the number of secondary schools we have. This is day, this is boarding school. Did you go around to always check and be sure that this is what is happening? How about the teachers going to the proprietors of every of the school? How is your employment, your way of employment? I mean, these are questions we need to ask, because just like you said, we've had numbers. Rachel, I've known of 2-3 people. You made mention of minors that were being abused and in school. And sometimes these kids are very afraid to even talk. Why? Because they have been threatened. I see they grow with it. And then we are also going to talk about parents that are very careless. Your words will come back and you notice there's a change in the behavior and you don't care to know. You are chasing after things that do not matter, and before you realize it'll be too late. So I'm hoping that all of this thing need to be checked, and that is why I would say that even minors are beginning to use. You see cases of sexual relationship even between siblings going on in the home because of certain things like this. I mean, Rachel, this is something that gets me very emotional, but I'm hoping that the government will do what they're supposed to do. Hopefully. Here we're seeing River State is actually moving for schools to return back to the government school, but are we sure the government will have the time to go around and check that? So this is a question we need to ask. We need to weigh the two options. Which one will be better? Is it the private schools or is it the government school? And do our government have time to go around even to the private schools to check what is happening? Just like you say, I've seen a number of schools, Rachel, it's more like a building. And you wonder, is the Ministry of Education aware that there is a school like this functioning? So I really, really hope that the government will wake up and do what they are expected to do, to go around and check all of the things that are happening in the schools.
Hopefully. Still on the Daily Times newspaper, Nigerians may run out of patience if federal government fails to address food crisis, Senate warns. AWS configuration will improve data availability and quality control, NIMED DG CEO Onosike is saying. More details can be found on page 18. We have a picture story where we can see troops of the 6th Brigade Nigerian Army Sector 3 operation Wild Stroke after neutralizing and demanding terrorism networks in the forest. This happened in Wukari local government area of Taraba State, and that's all the news on the Daily Times newspaper.
On the Guardian newspaper, the issue of the new ministry, Tinubu will headers with livestock ministry, increase fiscal strain. We're already complaining of how our fiscal policy is, our monetary policy. Now this is going to put a strain on our fiscal policy. So you can do well to read more detail of that on page 6. Senate raises alarm over empty food reserve, warn of imminent protests. We have Kwasu expel 1,175 rather. Kwasu expel 175 students for theft, possession of firearms and others. More detail on page 8. NBA allies concern over Samoa agreement as reps order suspension. Federal government enlists NSA military to rescue power infrastructure against vandalism, where we saw yesterday the punishment for those who are found doing that. Farmers decry sale of Ondo Forest Reserve to firms. Now imagine farmers as well saying that they need a ministry because of issues like this. So you can read more detail of that on page 7. NNPCL to borrow another $2 billion crook-back loan. Weakness tell the court how MFLM moved funds to wife coffers, detailed on page 5. NDDC to borrow 1 trillion naira to fund 2024 budget. More detail found on page 29, and that's all on the Guardian newspaper.
On the Nation newspaper, FAAN subsidizing 19 unavailable airports, says CEO. Federal government gets Ministry of Livestock Development. Varsity workers protest over outstanding pay rocks campuses. NPAN expresses concern over safety of Alabelewe and Abdu. You can find details on page 4. How Emefiele removed millions to wife buying witness. You can start with the details on the front page. Government to pay 36 months salary arrears of Unity School teachers. Details can be found on page 3. The big story, minimum wage. Labour hopeful of better deal. We are in talks to ensure submission of bill soon, says TUC president. Tinubu relieves fund memories of Mon at play presentation. You can start with the details on the front page. The man died resurrects on Lagos stage. Details can be found on page 13. Air Force promotes and retires 4 officers. More details can be found on page 27. That's all the news on the Nation newspaper.
On Daily Sun newspaper, reps asked the federal government to suspend implementation of Samoa Agreement. It didn't infringe on our right and sovereignty coming from the NBA. The big story, food crisis, Senate warns of nationwide protests, say food reserves empty. More detail found on page 6. And the question will be, what is the government going to do about that? But we'll recall, Rachel, we spoke about that when the government said it should be empty so that they will share food. Yet the food that Nigerians are yet to say they really saw, they've eaten. So I really hope that the government have an alternative of what they need to do to have food back in the reserve just in case of something happening in the nation. So we're seeing that Senate's already warning of a protest is something if not done about that. So we hope that the government will do what they need to do to make sure that Nigerians are actually filled, because once you're hungry, you get angry, and when you're angry, it leads to something different. So we hope they do something about that. Stop cursing Nigeria because of hardship, Shetima tells citizens. Well, it will be difficult except if they get food to eat. More detail found on page 27. Tinubu create Ministry of Livestock Development, inaugurate Presidential Committee on Livestock Reform. Mayati Allah hails because it was their request to have the Livestock Ministry in the first place. Federal government spent 5.78 trillion naira on debt servicing in first month of 2023, coming from the Budget Office. Bill to create special parliamentary seat for women passes the second reading in House of Rep, proposes 74 National Assembly, 108 State Assembly seats. More detail of all this can be found on page 28. And we have the MPAN worried over the fate of abducted Kaduna-based journalists. SANU NASU hold nationwide protests, appeal to president over withheld salaries. ICPC lament a high rate of sexual harassment in primary and secondary schools. Southeast Towns Union back governors demand for Kanu's freedom. More detail on page 28. U.S. troop complete first phase of withdrawal from Niger. And we've seen the picture story here, the long queues at the various filling stations in Wuse, Abuja, and also at Lagos as the fuel scarcity bites harder yesterday. And we've seen that it's even affecting the price of transportation right now. So all of this can be found in the paper, and that's all on Daily Sun newspaper.
On the Matrix newspaper, federal government seeks additional $2 billion loan secured by crude oil to stimulate economic growth. A report, you can start with the details on the front page and continue on page 3. Yamal makes history as Spain beat France to qualify for Euro 2024 final. Details can be found on page 16. Knox kudos greet creation of Ministry of Livestock Development. The writer says Meeti Allah Sani hails Tinubu. We have Laolu Akande, others kick. More details can be found on page 3. Tinubu Obi Atiku celebrates Sheikh Dairu Bauchi on 100th birthday. More details can be found on page 3. How funds were moved from CBN through Emefiele's wife, coming from an EFCC witness. The big story on the paper, Samoa Agreement, National Assembly waits in. Reps ask federal government to suspend implementation, call for investigation. Blame federal government for not carrying National Assembly along in deal signing. Agreement expressly made subject to local laws and sovereignty. Statement coming from the NBA. Details can be found on page 2. On scarcity, filling stations to operate longer hours to aid PMS supply, coming from NNPCL. Federal government hopes to raise 300 billion naira from July 2024 bond auction. Only 3 of 22 Nigerian airports profitable, a report from FAAN. More details can be found on page 9. You're ungrateful if you text sin after receiving financial help. An actor is fuming. You can find details on page 15. We have a picture story, a collaboration where we can see the Chief of Air Staff, Nigeria Air Force, Air Marshal Hassan Balam, and presenting a souvenir to the Director General, Nigerian Maritime Administration and Safety Agency, Dr. Dayo, during a courtesy visit by the NIMASA DG to the Nigerian Air Force headquarters in Abuja recently. That's all the news on the Matrix newspaper.
Right before we continue with the paper review, let's just take this time out, let you choose the stories, what you feel about the reps and NBA view on the Samoa agreement, as well as the federal, talking about the federal government also creating another ministry, that is the livestock ministry. So quite a number of stories on the papers. When we come back, we will continue the paper review. Please stay tuned with us.
Make your everyday informative, make your everyday count. Know your world, daily affairs, national and international, with authentic news events as they unfold on Global News and Zoom on Nigeria, Monday to Friday at 1 p.m.
Welcome back. It's still the dailies. We have been looking at a number of stories on the paper. The issue of the former CBN governor, where we're seeing that an EFCC witness is saying he actually used his wife's account to push money from the CBN. And as well, we're seeing that ICPC is actually talking about sexual harassment in primary and secondary schools. And then we're seeing that the federal government has actually created another new ministry, even though there is no minister yet. That's talking about the livestock ministry. So we have a number of other stories on the paper that are quite appealing. We will love you to go through them. Drop your comment, your views on Facebook and on YouTube as well. Well, let's continue with the paper review, looking at the Daily News Herb newspaper. We have MRA MPAN urged the federal government to ensure safe return of abducted Kaduna journalists. And the big story is on hunger. Senate in panic debate warns Tinubu Nigerians losing patience. Fear attack by hungry, ravaged, angry citizens. Raiser alarm Nigerians food reserves zero, silos empty. More detail found in the paper. And we're seeing this picture story actually also talking about the protests by SANU and NASU yesterday, where we're seeing some of them holding different placards, pay SANU, NASU, and then it's withheld salaries and other write-ups that they hold during their protests yesterday. Alleged 423 billion naira fraud, El-Rufai tackles fresh jab at Kaduna governor. More detail found in the paper. Rivers crisis. Tinubu deliberately refused to call Wike to order coming from the Niger Delta group. Says the president silent on lingering feud between the FCT minister Fubara worrisome. On price hike, rep threatening arrest of Dangote cement management. More detail in the paper. Why PDP crisis is worrisome, you can find that in the paper. Nigerians react in frustration to fuel scarcity in Abuja, Nasarawa as transport fare skyrocket. Tinubu create Ministry of Livestock Development to stop farmers' herders clash. Wike Fubara feel only God can tackle rivers crisis coming from Sheikh Hussaini, and I believe this is a man-made issue. So we shouldn't say only God can do that. We are ready and willing. We can stop that issue, talking about what's happening in River State. Police arrest man for abducting 18-month-old baby in Kano, and you ask the question why. That's on Human Angle. You can find more detail of that in the paper. LGBT clause controversy, suspend Samoa agreement. 88 reps tell the federal government, mandate relevant House committee to probe agreement provision. And on fuel scarcity, reps wait in, probe development. More detail in the paper, and that's all on Daily News Herb newspaper.
On First News newspaper, the big story, legislative showdown. Lawmakers take bold stance on national crisis and controversies. Senate asks Tinubu to address hunger, says Nigerians losing patience. Reps threaten to arrest Dangote cement management over price hike, call for suspension of Samoa agreement implementation. Tinubu creates livestock ministry to foster peace between herders and farmers. Reps advances bill for 74 additional legislative seats for women. Marketers blame NNPC for fresh petrol scarcity, explain price increment. Confusion as Tinubu's aides delete statement announcing duty-free food importation. Only 3 Nigerian airports are commercially viable, says fan boss. Liberian President Boakai slashes salary by 40% to promote fiscal integrity. That's all the news on First News newspaper.
Well, let's take a look at the next paper, which is Nigerian News Direct. Tinubu target economic prosperity from livestock development. Create Federal Ministry of Livestock Development, tax Tijani and others to implement reform, automation of livestock. Federal government inaugurate new SEC board, charges member to drive capital market growth. Governor Adeleke backs award as Osun emerges the first position in net fraud process. How Lagos GDP grew to 41 trillion naira under Sanwo-Olu's administration, coming from a commissioner. NCAA to sanction airline operators over deceitful departure. And on withheld salaries, protests rock Lagos, Ogun, Osun as Sanu Nasu threaten indefinite strike. Halt revenue allocation to local government governed by caretakers, reps, urges the RMAFA. More detail in the paper, and that's all on Nigerian News Direct.
On Daily Independent newspaper, federal government to invest in made in Nigeria vehicles, asks Nigerians to support auto sector. While fuel scarcity will persist for long in Nigeria, by Pengasan. You can start details on the front page and continue on page 7. The big story, take emergency measures to end hunger, Senate tells the federal government. The writer says address Nigerians on step being taken to tackle situation. Reps ask federal government to suspend Samoa agreement implementation. Bill seeking 74 legislative seats for women passes second reading. NCAA vows to sanction airlines over deceitful departure time. Reps pro PMS subsidies, scarcity, depot racketeering, and others. Ease of doing business moves Lagos GDP from 27 trillion naira to 41 trillion naira. Labour says minimum wage struggle not dead, insists on 250,000 naira. Post-warning strike, NASU SANU to picket strategic government office in Abuja. Tinubu creates livestock development ministry, embraces ranching. Offers fresh appointment to former INEC chairman Jega. NPAN tax federal government on safe return of abducted journalists and families. More details can be found on page 6, and that's all the news on Daily Independent newspaper.
On Sweet Report, Naira Nigeria oil export earning to 201%. Nigeria signed agreement on hydrogen energy development, and we have Nigeria's oil and gas failed to attract capital importation in the first quarter. Nigeria seek France partnership on CNG renewable energy development. More detail in the paper, and that's all on Sweet Crew Report.
On Sporting Sun, the big story: PSG seeks 34 billion naira reduction in Osimhen's transfer fee. Nigerian striker starts pre-season with Napoli. More details can be found on page 6. ITTF celebrates Toriola Osonike orders in Club 7 of table tennis at Olympic Games. Murata's wife fuels Spain controversy. You can find details at the back page. Kane shirt to raise funds for charity. Details can be found in the back page. Vinicius apologizes for Brazil exit from Copa America. Pizarro linked with Super Eagles return. Chelsea plans opening bid of 30 million euros. Karim Adeyemi. You can find details inside the paper. Ndidi agrees Leicester City new contract. Details can be found on page 6. On Honor True Transport table 6 million euros, 25% sell on deal to Southampton. Details can be found on page 3. Nantes drill Moses Simon for first pre-season friendly. Mayweather, God told me to spend 1.8 million euros on cars. You can find details at the back page. We have Kelman confirms Weghorst won't start against England. More details can be found on page 3. And we have Lille accepts Man United 50 million euros offer for Lenny Euro. Details can be found inside the paper. Saudi sports minister blames club for botched Salah deal. Details can be found on page 2. That's all the news on Sporting Sun newspaper.
On the Business Times newspaper, Nigerians may run out of patience if federal government fails to address food crisis, Senate wants. NCAA to sanction airlines engaged in deceitful departure time scheduling. Why we are subsidizing 19 airports, coming from FAN, which is a big story on the paper. Say only 3 of Nigerian airports are profitable. Majority of 22 airports managed by FAN require upgrade of critical infrastructure. Here we have in the NGX Hammer C&I licensing, 7 other equity over non-submission of financial statement. And on economic integration, federal government canvasses unified business law for Africa. Number of internet service providers dip in July 2024. And here we have Tinubu create the Ministry of Livestock Development Tax Reform Committee on Agricultural Productivity. Detail found on page 2, and that's all on Business Times newspaper.
On Punch Sport Extra, Rangers welcome 3 foreign players. Details can be found on page 6. Oluko, third ex-Eagle to get EPL role. Flamingos to raise Mexico in friendly. We have Spain 2, France 1. Gritty La Roja edges the Blue to reach final. Chelsea in Adeyemi talks. Details can be found on page 4. 3 Lions target successive Euro finals. You can find details on page 3. The big story: massive drop. Eagles squad value depreciate from 343 million euros to 252 million euros. On Wimbledon, Djokovic slams fans for booing him. Osimhen starts Napoli preseason, awaits offer. Man United girls zig Euro boost. More details can be found on page 5, and that's all the news on Punch Sport Extra.
All right, let's round it up with another business paper, which is the Business Day newspaper. Voluntary delisting brought NGX growth. Detail found on page 31. Petrol landing cost hit 978 naira per litre. And we have NPA urges the federal government to rescue abducted journalists, wives, and children. Food import success lies on avoiding past hurdles. So we need to know what those hurdles are. You can do well to start reading on the front page. And continue on page 30, we have two picture story, one from FCMB Bank and another where we can see the IGP of the police over there. You can draw out to get the paper and read more detail of any of the story that is of interest to you. And that's how far we can go on the program this morning. Thanks to you, Rachel.
You're welcome, Sarah.
And thank you also to our viewers. Thank you to every other person who made this program a success. We look forward again to doing this tomorrow. Do have a wonderful day ahead.